He found out I was with 3 guys a week in college, and he won't even hug me anymore. Okay, so there's a lot about this post that most of you probably won't like. I haven't made the best decisions in the past, or now, honestly, but it wasn't on purpose. Things just got out of hand. Before you go tearing into me in the comments, just know that I already feel like shit, alright? I'm not some remorseless asshole. I feel bad about what happened. For the most part, I met Daniel, male 27, in my final year of veterinary school, which also happened to be the year I was trying to get my life together. I was focused on turning a new leaf, and somehow he helped with that. Daniel had graduated a year earlier from the same school, but he still came around sometimes to visit friends or handle stuff in his old department. He was an English major, so we'd never crossed paths before. When I ran into him on campus one morning, I was speed walking to class, head buried in my notes because I was late and half convinced we had a surprise test. We bumped into each other, and he caught me before I hit the ground. When I looked up, he was smiling. Not a creepy smile, just warm. I didn't realize how much I needed someone to be kind to me until then. He asked for directions, and I gave them, but neither of us moved. Eventually, he asked if he could walk me to class. I said yes. We talked on the way there. That whole walk is burned into my memory because somehow I already liked him. I wasn't the type to catch feelings fast, or at all really, but with Daniel I did. When he asked for my number and I gave it to him, I was just relieved he hadn't heard of me before. I honestly thought he might be lying since everyone knew about me, or at least had heard something. Rumors, gossip, whispers. But he was different. Like most writers, a bit of a recluse, didn't care for gossip, didn't chase drama. That's what I liked most about him. He felt clean, untouched by everything I was trying to leave behind. We started dating during my final year. I didn't hide him because I was ashamed of him. I hid him because I didn't want anyone poisoning what we had. I told him campus was too hectic for dates, and he believed me. He never realized I was being strategic, keeping him away from anything that might connect me to my past. I just wanted to protect what we had. He saw me for who I was, not what I'd done, not what he'd heard, just me, and I held on to that. Sometimes I thought it was only a matter of time before someone exposed me, but no one did. I finished school, no drama, and we kept dating even after graduation. Eventually, Daniel suggested we get an apartment together in the next town over, and I was happy to get away from everything. I know this probably sounds cryptic, and maybe a little annoying, but I'm getting there. I promise. I just need a few more minutes before I spill all my secrets to strangers online. Anyway, a few years after I graduated and a few years into living with Daniel, he proposed. I could type all day and still not be able to completely explain how excited I was. I was happy because I loved him and wanted to be with him, of course, but also because it felt like the validation I'd always hoped for. It was proof that despite my past, someone could still want to be with me and love me. So I obviously said yes. Just a few months into being engaged, though, my luck would finally run out. However, I can't explain what comes next without finally talking about what happened back in college. Before I get into it, I would like you all to understand that I'm not that kind of person anymore. I've grown from my mistakes and I've learned my lessons. Now I have, anyway. So back when I was in my second year of college, I sort of developed a reputation. One that was cool and impressive for the boys to have, but for girls, it was practically social suicide, and that reputation was seeping around. Or at least just having multiple partners, having a body count, essentially. The truth of it was just that I liked to have sex, and for a while I didn't let what people would think stop me from getting it. I don't have any of the usual pitying excuses like I was insecure and needed sex to feel better about myself, or that I had sex to feel loved. It was nothing like that. I just liked it, and I wasn't shy about that. So, naturally, people hated me for it. Now, because I'm being so honest, I'm not going to pretend like I'm such an innocent person, or that the hate that I got was solely because of that. It wasn't. I, occasionally, very rarely, would sleep with the boyfriends of some of the girls in my year. Sometimes I was completely oblivious to the fact that they were in relationships, and sometimes I went ahead with it, knowing full well that they were. In my mind, it wasn't my business. I didn't owe any of those girls anything, so I never felt bad. I don't need to tell you that all this unsurprisingly made me the campus slut. You might be thinking that maybe I deserve the title, or some of you may be more rational and instead be thinking about how juvenile in high school it is to refer to someone as a slut in college, a place notorious for sexual exploration and liberation. Unfortunately, my college was a small one in an even smaller town. Excitement was hard to come by, so people clung onto gossip and drama like it was a lifeline, so they would hurl insults and taunt me. I would get disgusting messages and photos sent to me. Sometimes, if people were feeling especially immature, I would even get things written on and/or pasted onto my dorm door. To no one's surprise, this didn't exactly make me popular with my roommates or anyone on my floor, really. What really used to piss me off was the hypocrisy of it all. It was those same guys that would laugh at me and send me stupid messages that would try to flirt with me at parties and try to date me when their friends weren't around. And in those brief moments, they would seem so sincere and genuine, like they actually liked me, but then I would reject them and they would turn around and be horrible to me again. I used to have a pretty big circle of friends, but they eventually dwindled down when the taunting got to be too much for them. Some of them even joined in eventually. Through all of this, though, I was relatively unfazed. I've always had tougher skin, so I didn't get bothered by things easily. Unfortunately for me, things became a lot harder in my third year. That was the year I got a boyfriend. You might be wondering how the hell I pulled it off, considering my reputation, and the answer is that I found someone who knew about everything but just didn't care. Or at least, that was what I thought. I met Eric at a party, and at first he seemed like all the others. But then after I rejected him, he seemed okay with it. He didn't suddenly blow up at me and switch to calling me names. He just nodded and walked away. That made me curious about him. Not enough to talk to him again, though, or seek him out or anything. I wouldn't have to in the end, though, because he eventually came to me. It took a while and a few weeks of us casually talking before I gave him a chance. He claimed that he didn't care about what all the others said or what I'd done, and that he just liked me for me. And he proved that in the first few weeks of us being together by not treating me like a secret. He would hold my hand when we walked around school, walk me to my classes, and then kiss me goodbye before he left. All the things that couples did. Eric was an athlete, which meant that he was popular and very well liked, so my proximity to him helped to reduce the amount of hate I was getting. No one wanted to be the one to call the star pitcher's girlfriend a slut or lose favor with Eric, and by extension, the rest of the team. Of course, this didn't make the comments stop completely, but it did make my life just a little bit easier. Unfortunately, it wouldn't last long because Eric had only wanted to believe that he was okay with my history. All it took was a few guys who didn't care about Eric's star status, hurling some not-so-safe-for-work things at us a few times at parties or games. And Eric was suddenly different. He became irritable and angry. He would get pissed off at the things that I wore, even though he had no problem with them before. He would accuse me of cheating if I so much as spoke to any guy that wasn't him. I probably could have handled things better than what I did next. I should have just broken up with him and let the comments continue. But that didn't feel like enough. I wanted to punish him for making me believe that he was different, for letting me believe that he accepted me only to judge me later. He constantly accused me of cheating, so I wanted to give him the satisfaction of being right. After I got with Eric, I rarely ever went to parties. Not because I didn't want to, but because he didn't like it when I did. He thought it was weird that I would go for them when I had a boyfriend, and I was so grateful that he would even consider being with me that I agreed, no questions asked. But then I got tired of it all. I felt stifled and like everything about me was being policed. I was so conscious of myself, my body, and what I was doing when I was around him, and I hated it. So I dealt with him by going to all the parties I could find in a single week and getting as drunk as I could. And I'm not sure if I had already made the decision to cheat on him, or if it was something that I decided I didn't mind doing in the moment. But after I hooked up with the first guy during one party, I didn't stop. I ended up sleeping with 3 guys that week, all while still being with Eric. It felt amazing. That makes me sound like a bitch, but it's true. I felt free and like myself again, and I couldn't bring myself to feel guilty or care about the consequences. Eric and the team had been away for a game at the time, but he found out the second he got back. It wasn't like I tried to hide it, and it wasn't like anyone, except for the few friends that I had any loyalty to me. He confronted me as soon as he could, in public, and it was as messy as you're probably imagining. He lashed out and called me every horrible thing I'd ever heard before breaking up with me. And that public breakup signaled to everyone that I was no longer off limits. I could now be ridiculed and embarrassed again, even more so now that I'd broken the heart of the school's golden boy. The harassment came back in full force, and it was worse than it had ever been. It was so bad that despite my resolve, I ended up shrinking in on myself. I became a pariah through and through. It was so bad that even though I still had people in my corner, I decided to just do things alone. I didn't want to risk them getting involved and then them eventually hating me for it like last time. That was how I went into my final year, alone, ostracized, and avoiding my own friends. Just a few months after everything went down was when I met Daniel, and now you understand why I was so shocked to find out that he'd never heard anything about me. The way I was treated, you'd think everyone in the country had heard my name at least once, but I guess college was a vacuum like that, and small things seemed so huge inside those four walls. Now that I've gotten that mess out of the way, it's time for me to talk about an even bigger mess. The mess that led me to writing this whole thing on here in the first place. So, like I said, things got ruined a few months into our engagement. I got a message from an old friend saying that a few of them were throwing a party and that I should come. I was hesitant because the last thing I wanted was see some of the people who'd gone out of their way to make my life hell. But on the other hand, I also did really want to see my friends, and going back meant that I could rub my engagement in the faces of those people who'd been horrible to me. I decided to go. I told Daniel that I was going for a hangout with my friends, and he didn't bat an eye. I drove back into town and got a hotel. That night I went to the party, and I was surprised to see that for the most part everyone was cordial with me. Of course, it was nice to see my friends, but I could barely focus on them when I noticed that people were actually being nice to me. No one went out of their way to antagonize me or to apologize either, but they were friendly. It was great, and after a few drinks, I found myself actually having a nice time. Or at least that was until Eric walked in. It had only been a few years since the last time I saw him, so he looked older but still very handsome. I was surprised to see him, and even more surprised when he greeted me like we were close friends. He noticed that I was less than welcoming of his presence and asked if we would talk in private. Despite my better judgment, I agreed. Once we were alone, he told me that he'd heard about my engagement and that he wanted to congratulate me in person. He continued by saying that he was sorry about how things ended between us. I tried to brush it off and tell him that it was all right, but he continued on and said that he was sorry that he essentially threw me to the wolves, that even if we weren't together anymore, he shouldn't have left me to fend for myself. The whole thing made me feel a bit emotional, so I stayed with him, and we continued talking. That was how I found myself getting incredibly drunk and reminiscing about all the good times in our relationship with my ex-boyfriend. It was strange but nice. We talked for so long, and throughout all of it, I didn't even notice that we were getting closer together. It wasn't until I laughed at something he said, and he reached over to straighten my hair, that I realized there was barely any space between us. I don't really have an excuse for what came next. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe I'd actually missed my relationship with him. Maybe I was at a party with college friends and I was feeling nostalgic. I'm not sure why. I just know that I kissed him, and when he suggested that we go look for an empty room, I went with him. That was how I had sex with my ex-boyfriend while being engaged to my fiancé. This time I did feel guilty, though, because unlike Eric, Daniel didn't deserve it. He'd been nothing but the perfect partner, and I'd betrayed him regardless. After I got dressed, I went back to my hotel room to wait out the alcohol and the eventual hangover, and then I drove back home the second I could. I was so worried about what to do about Daniel and whether I should tell him, how he would react if I did tell him, and what would happen to our relationship, that I didn't have any time to think about Eric and if he'd been telling the truth about everything he'd said or not. Days after I got back from the party, I still hadn't told Daniel. It felt like he'd sensed that I'd done something I shouldn't have if I got too close, so I tried to avoid him when I could. It was odd, trying to avoid someone you lived with, someone you were supposed to marry in a few months. Daniel didn't notice my strangeness, though, because he was too busy with work. His publisher needed him to do PR for his new book release, and so he had to go on a short trip. That was what he told me, and I had no reason not to believe him. It was rare, these book tours and signings, because of how introverted he was, but they happened. But after Daniel got back, he started acting pretty strange. Everything was weird after he got back. For one, he was only gone for about 2 days. His book tours usually took about a week, 2 sometimes, but he was back barely 2 days later without any explanation. When I asked him about it, he brushed me off and told me that his publisher had made a mistake with the dates. I'd met his publisher before, and she was the very definition of strict. It was hard to imagine her mixing something as important as that up, but I didn't question him after that. His weird, distant behavior continued, though. He was acting cagey and jumpy like he was keeping a secret, and he would get irritated at me for the smallest of things. I couldn't figure out what was wrong, and he didn't want to tell me anything. About a week after his so-called book trip, I asked Daniel when we were supposed to go check out the bakery for cake flavors. It was one of the last things we had left to do, and I was trying to be excited about it, trying to get us back into that wedding headspace again. But he looked at me and said there was no point. I remember standing there blinking at him, thinking maybe I'd misheard. So I asked again. He repeated it, in the same calm tone like he was telling me we were out of milk or something. I asked what he meant, what the hell he was talking about, and why he was acting so weird. That's when he looked at me and said it. The wedding was off. He'd already called the vendors. Most of them had been canceled, just like that. I swear my stomach dropped so hard I thought I was going to be sick. I felt dizzy, like my whole body was short-circuiting. I just kept saying, "What? What do you mean the wedding's off?" over and over again, like maybe repetition would undo whatever was happening. He didn't even flinch. And then he told me Eric hadn't come to the party to be civil or apologize. He'd come to ruin me, to make sure Daniel found out who he was really marrying. That's what the whole Congrats act was about. That's why he showed up at all. He wanted proof and I gave it to him. I made it easy. Apparently, while I was busy being caught off guard by his fake little speech, he or one of his friends had taken photos of us kissing, and Daniel had seen them. The book trip wasn't a trip. It was just a cover so he could drive into town and meet up with Eric. And that's where my insane ex, who I should have never trusted in a million years, showed him everything. The pictures, the stories, the whole ugly truth about who I used to be. The thing I'd spent years trying to hide had finally caught up with me. Daniel knew everything, and the first thing he did was cancel our wedding. By the time he finished talking, I was sobbing. Ugly, loud, messy crying that I couldn't control. I kept begging him to listen to me, to understand that I wasn't that girl anymore, that Eric showing up messed with my head, that it was a moment of weakness, a stupid kiss, a mistake. I said all of it, threw everything I had at him, but he just stood there. And then he said something that completely blindsided me. He told me he wasn't leaving, that he wasn't taking the ring back, that we were still together, just not getting married. Not right now. He said he needed time to figure out if he could still see me the same way. Time to decide if he could get past everything he now knew. So that was it. The wedding was off. But I was still in the relationship. I'd ruined everything and somehow still hadn't lost him. Not yet, anyway. But I could feel it. The shift and the space growing between us. I knew things would never be the same. At first I thought that it was a blessing, that I'd been spared the worst of it, and that him not immediately leaving me was a good thing. But now, weeks after that day, I'm not so sure. We were still living together and were still, for all intents and purposes, in a relationship, but nothing was the same. He didn't look at me the same or talk to me the same. That was if we even spoke at all. We suddenly became strangers in our own apartment. He didn't touch me anymore. He didn't even hug me anymore, and we hadn't had sex since before the party. Some days I wished maybe he had left me. Maybe that would be better than his coldness. Living like this was torture. I still loved him, but I could feel him slipping away, and I didn't know how much longer I could take it. Little did I know it was about to get much worse. At first it was little things, snide comments, subtle jabs. He'd kiss me in front of friends and then make digs about loyalty, like he wasn't talking about me. He started staying out later, dressing better, locking his phone. I told myself it was just him trying to cope, that I deserved it. But then it escalated. There were team trips he never used to take, photos with coworkers I'd never heard of, a girl in one of them, standing just a little too close. When I asked to come on one of his trips, he just laughed and said, "You've already had your fun." Obviously, I couldn't say anything more. I had no leg to stand on. Then I saw the email, a wedding vendor thanking us for transferring services. Turns out he'd rebooked our venue for someone else. I asked him why, and he just said I shouldn't worry about it. I don't know what to do, or if there's a way I can get my husband back. I don't think he has actually forgiven me, and now, each day feels like I'm waiting for something to change his mind. Something that will make him snap, pack his things, take the ring, and leave me behind. I can't help but think that he's getting back at me, slowly, quietly, in ways that leave no proof but make me question everything. He won't tell me anything. It's making me paranoid. Whatever he's trying to do is working, and I cry constantly. I overthink everything. I don't know what's real or how to fix this. He didn't leave, but he's making sure I feel what he felt. Maybe worse. I still love him. I want to make things right. But what if I already lost him and I'm just the only one still pretending? What do I do?